the challenge of the governance and reform in Iraq. Dr. Delaware, 1 hour is not enough, but we try to be, we try to highlight it briefly and give the recommendation briefly. Reform, or better say, plan of reform and initiatives being included in the speech of the who've been in charge in Iraq or nominated to be in charge in Iraq, but that reform never been accomplished. Always Iraq been in pending or ongoing status. When we refer to a good governance, when we refer to when we refer, I mean by mentioning the good governance, I believe I'm covering all. Still, Iraq is tagged as a fragile, facing many challenges, political, security, economic, and why and what for and how for this. I'm really honored to present my both speakers. Actually, we need to start with the lady, as she's the, I mean, ladies always first, but she preferred to start with Qubad. We are in the KRI and he is the prime. Yes, I mean, that's what that's by her request. So, Qubad, the Deputy Prime Minister of KRI, been more than 7 years in the government. Right,
a lot more.
And he
22.
Right, and the bilingual and the known of the diplomatic son of Mam Jalal. Now the trilingual, we say. You lately give speeches in Arabic language, right?
I'm learning.
You're learning.
I'm learning.
That's great. And the second speaker, Miss Jeanine. Well, over 20 years of political and diplomatic career. You enjoy the challenges, I believe. You enjoy being the first lady as a Minister of Defense, and now since 2018 in Iraq. Welcome you both, and let's start with the challenges. I mean, where is from Qubad, from your perspective? What are the challenges?
Wow, we only have 1 hour, right?
We only have 1 hour according to Dr. Delaware, so we try to fix to that. And you have 5 to 7 minutes to answer that question.
Okay. The challenges of governance in Iraq are many, and when I'm talking generally to include Kurdistan as well. The biggest challenge is that governance is not the #1 priority in the country. If you look at the last year when we've been negotiating the formation of a government post-elections, the smallest number of time was allocated to discussions about governance. Everything was focused on who gets what position, which party gets which position, which community gets which position. And then within those communities, we were all fighting over the positions, not the policies. And that's what's missing. That is the biggest challenge for governance in the country today, is that this country, to include, if I can add my government in Kurdistan, is that there is a lack of policies. We all do politics, but we don't have policies. And that when there is such an imbalance between the focus on politics rather than the focus on policies, you get the chaos that we have now. You get a lack of clarity as to what the government is doing or should be doing. You have no way to assess the competence of a government because, again, usually governments get judged on how they implement the policies. Well, when we just do politics, it's easy to do nothing in politics and to cause problems in politics and to block in politics and to stop things from happening in politics. But that's I think the biggest challenge here is that there is not the focus on governance that there should be.
May I see the implementation of the policies that you are working on?
In my tenure, and this is now my second term as Deputy Prime Minister, we've been focusing on reforms, right? And that could be considered policies, like a policy to reform. We've been focusing a lot on some structural reforms on how the government should function in the Kurdistan region. Now, in 2014, when I took office as Deputy Prime Minister, we were hit with multiple shocks. We had budget cuts from Baghdad, we had the war with ISIS, we had the humanitarian disaster of 1,800,000 refugees and IDPs coming to Kurdistan. We had the drop in oil prices. This forced us to accelerate reforms. It forced us to look at issues such as wasteful spending. It forced us to look at issues such as ghost employees. It forced us to look at issues such as increasing non-oil revenues. It forced us to look at issues such as how do we restructure the government? How do we rely on data? How do we analyze data? These things really were forced upon us, I'll be honest. If things were rosy and oil prices were high and there wasn't public pressure and there wasn't all of the stresses on us, and if Baghdad hadn't cut our budgets, I think things would have plodded along as they had done in the past.
Right. If I list them according to your explanation, is first starting with the policy and then the implementation, and then let's say the people who implement the policy.
Yes. And then the fourth piece, the people who monitor the implementation of the policy, which is the public. Now, who creates policies? Political parties create policies, right?
Right.
What are the ideologies of the political parties in Iraq? You know, you look at, we just saw the new Italian Prime Minister swear into office. She's from a far-right party. Her party has clear policies. We don't have political parties that have ideologies here. There's nobody's left. Maybe the Communist Party of Iraq and Kurdistan, they have a policy. They're communists. Everything else is just a combination of everything. Right. So that's another problem. We all talk about governance, reform in governments. Nobody talks about reform in political parties.
Right. Here we are talking about a huge issue as a politic never been away from the government. We will be entering in a loop that never ends, because who create the government are the political parties. And then the political parties, according to you, are kind of, blamed for not having the policies. This is one, and then gratify me if I am. Is it that?
Look, there's a multitude of problems. One of them is the political parties. The second is the political rivalries. Now, reform and governance needs an authorizing environment. It needs an environment a government needs an environment to function. I look back to what we faced in 2014, that 8th cabinet, the last cabinet. The cabinet started with budget cuts, no revenues from Baghdad. We had a war, we had a humanitarian crisis, we had a drop in oil prices, we had to cut civil servants' salaries, sometimes by up to 75%. We had to deal with months and months of boycotts of employees. We had demonstrations for months. Now, that was not the best environment to function in. However, we were unified in the government.
So nepotism.
So we were able to bypass some of the political rivalries, protect the government from the political infighting, protect the government from the conflicts between the various security services in Kurdistan, which were very strong at the time, protect the government from the rivalries between the KDP and PUK at the time, even though the Prime Minister was KDP and the Barzani and the Deputy Prime Minister was PUK and the Talabani. But we protected that government because we knew that if we let the rivalries seep into the government, that would be it. That would be the end of the government. Right. So we, despite all of the pressures, We were under enormous pressure. I was under enormous pressure from my own political party. Many of them wanted me to come out of the government. Many of them were criticizing me for being too pro-government, right? But we couldn't do that because, I looked behind me. The Prime Minister was there. He had my back. I had his back. And together we weathered that storm. We weathered the referendum and the boycott from the international community against the KRG. We weathered all of the economic sanctions against us. We weathered losing all of our revenues. We were able to, because we were unified in the government, because we put, government first, we survived. And I think that shows that if there is political will, if there's unity, if there's a clarity of vision, and if there is, most importantly, if there is teamwork, you can overcome all obstacles. But when the government becomes the playground for the fight, when the parties come in and fight their fights inside the government, nothing works.
Let's say that thanks to that unity or that teamwork that you are mentioning, is the slightly notable difference between KRI and rest of Iraq? Maybe, especially, there is a bit of facelifting in the issues, if we compare KRI and Iraq. But in terms of security, there is a huge plastic surgery, if I can.
Look, I'm talking about the years 2014 to 2017. I'm talking about the era when Netshirvan Barzani was the Prime Minister and I was the Deputy. We were able to protect that. We have a whole host of other challenges that we face here in the KRI that are obstacles to growth and to progress and to development. Now, Baghdad is a whole other issue because the players are more. Right? Here there are 2, 3 parties at most. Baghdad there are 20. Right? And that makes it more complicated, and the prize is bigger in Baghdad, so the fighting over the spoils is a bit more aggressive in Baghdad, and the regional and international and global interference and interest
we don't have that huge shift in the
we're a little less.
It's a little bit different. Thank you, Qubad, and thank you, Ms. Jeanine, for being that humble and letting to getting rid of your right as a lady to be the first, huh?
No. I honor the Deputy Prime Minister of the KRI.
Thank you. Ms. Jeanine, you've been in Iraq since 2018, and you've met all the leaders involved in personally as in your team and in depth in every single situation have the past 4 years Iraq passed through, and it was challenging.
Yes. Every day is a challenge.
Tashrin, changing government, and elections, one another. So, would you, according to your experience of the past 4 years, would you please tell us? How do you see this challenge?
Well, if we talk about the challenge of governance and reform in Iraq, I can make a long statement, but I can also be very short and sweet.
We go in between.
Okay, so I think the challenge is corruption.
Indeed.
It says it all. I could add a few more words: pervasive, structural, systemic. And in the absence of tackling the corruption, any attempt to push through serious reform will not succeed. So this is really the cause by now of Iraqi dysfunctionality, and this is what I wanted to suggest for today's discussion.
So, corruption. By saying corruption, whom you are pointing to? Are you pointing on the government? Are you pointing on the leaders? Are you pointing to the public themselves, to the civil society? We have a bunch of civil society around us. When we say corruption, whom you are pointing on?
No, I think, and I said this many times also in my briefings to the Security Council. It is a system by now in Iraq. It is a system. Over the past 20 years, a system was built in the name of national unity, with all parties participating in a power-sharing arrangement. And that is well understood. But I think it's fair to say, if you go back in time, that throughout the years, that arrangement turned into a quite closed community, a community of collusion and a community of corruption protection. And I think that it hinders the development of Iraq because it distracts resources, state resources, that are meant for national development and now are diverted to private and partisan interests. So we talk not about a few million, we don't talk about individual enrichment, we talk about a system and a network that involves players from across the spectrum. So it would involve, of course, politicians, leaders, business people, senior officials, I mean, armed actors. All walks of life are represented in the system. And that's why I continue to emphasize, don't talk too much about, individuals or certain events. Talk about it as a system, because it's the system, and that system needs systemic reform.
And again, I insist on the implementation of that. I mean, you need the characters. You need the characters to implement that. But if we are talking about the challenges, the internal challenges, of course we relate it to the corruption. But what about the external challenges? How do you see them? I mean, do they exist? I believe.
Well, I don't deny that there are some external challenges, whether it's in the region or beyond. But to face these challenges, you need domestic strength. In the absence of domestic strength, you kind of invite others to, use your territory for different power competitions. And yes, excuse me, I speak candidly for the sake of discussion, but I think it's fair to say this kind of things.
We are used to have such a conversation in MERI. I mean, Dr. Delaware don't mind it, right? Okay, sorry for the sound, because I'm not able to fix my mic, so I have to, please kind of remind me, whatever. Ms. Jeanine, the Iraqis have expectations from the international community that are based in Iraq, especially the UN agencies. By having the international let's say existence or appearance in Iraq, they assume certain of help, they assume certain of protection, they assume there are expectations. Would you please take us back to basics and tell us what is your mandate? What should Iraqis expect from you? I mean, when I mean you, of course, I mean the role of. Sometimes the expectations are a bit too high. So the UN family in Iraq is quite a big one, and we have a political side of the house that is, organizing dialogues with political parties and other interest groups, and we have a more humanitarian and development side of the house, the so-called agencies, funds, and programs, and we're here to support the Iraqi authorities and the Kurdistan region authorities and the people of the country. But we're not running the country. So sometimes, and I don't want to, I mean, we have authorities that are perfectly able to do it, although I do call on them to start pushing through some systemic reforms. But sometimes, I mean, even earlier this week, I had a beautiful conversation here in Erbil with a number of very powerful Kurdish ladies, and we were talking about the recent attacks from two neighbors, Turkey and Iran, and what it is doing with some of the communities here in the Kurdistan region. And they asked me to solve it. I cannot solve it. But what I did say is I will and I do speak with the neighbors. But again, I go back to domestic strength. So strength at home is really essential to have strength abroad, also in your dialogue with the neighbors. And so I said, you can call on me and say that I need to establish a no-fly zone. Doesn't work like that. But what I also ask you is to call on your own authorities, both in Erbil and Baghdad, to actually unite, not, to further build the close community of collusion within the context of corruption, but to unite and to serve the interests of the people. But do you think, I mean, the action plan you have, all the programs that you have planned for Iraq during the past 4 years being implemented? If yes, I'm glad to. If not, you might have barriers or you might have challenges. Maybe it's good for us to know what makes you not accomplish. If not, what makes you, if it's accomplished, why it's not seen.
Look, there are many competent people here in Erbil and in Baghdad and throughout the country. There are many great leaders doing amazing speeches, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to implementation. I think that Qubad Talabani mentioned it as well. In the absence of implementation, we're left with beautiful words. So also yesterday, I had another meeting and we talked about the importance of stability in the Baghdad-Erbil relationship. And we talked about the principles that, for example, Kurdish parties and the coordination framework agreed upon. And I said, that's great, the principles are great. But I'm here for 4 years now, and I've been conveyed so many principles, and we need to implement it. If we talk Baghdad-Erbil, and we go back to the constitution in 2005, I mean, general principles were enshrined in the constitution, and it was decided to leave the supporting legislation for a later stage. But 70 years later, we're still waiting. And this is maybe, if we talk about good governance, not helping the country. So manage public expectations by implementing your principles, by implementing what you agree on. It would help a lot, not only in the relationship Baghdad-Erbil, but throughout the country in, for example, serving the people of the country.
Right. Qubad, you've heard Ms. Jeanine talking about their support to you as the KRI. Maybe you could tell us what you received, what you are able to implement, what you are, how you explain that support.
From the international community
From
as
the
a whole,
international
or the
community,
UN?
for the international community, and of course, in particularly the UN agencies.
Well, I think if you'll allow me, Jeanine, she was very modest in presenting her mandate and what she's been able to do. I think what Jeanine has been able to do in the past few years has been quite remarkable. She's been at the forefront of every major discussion within the various political parties. She has equal access to everyone. She's the only one, actually, probably in the country that can see everyone, that can meet every single player, regional, domestic, religious, secular, government or security. So I think we're grateful to have somebody that has the bravery and the tenacity that she has. What disappoints me is that sometimes I feel she cares more about this country than the leaders of the country actually do. And that's, we're grateful that she cares, but I think we need to care more. And that's I think that's the missing piece of, the relationship between the international community and Iraq is the international community can't want democracy, civil society, development, economic development, reform, anti-corruption measures more than Iraq does, to include the KRI.
Right.
If that's the case, then they're just going to be spinning their wheels, and we'll be frustrated with them, and they'll be frustrated with us. But I think that now, you look at the way that the international community is engaged with Iraq over the last 17 years. The first few years was just throwing billions of dollars at infrastructure projects and trying to fix electricity and trying to fix water. And a lot of that was wasted because the system wasn't there to absorb it. 17 years later, the country doesn't have 24 hours of electricity. We'll just have MERI do some research into how much has been spent on the electricity sector in Iraq. Billions. Billions. And therein lies a problem. What we've been able to do, and personally what my office has been able to benefit with, working with many international partners, is bringing in specialized consultancy. Right? I need a tax expert. Okay, they sit in my office and they talk about tax. We need a customs expert. I don't all right, great. If anyone wants to give us billions of dollars to recreate a new tax service, I won't turn it down. But I'd much rather have somebody help me that's worked in other areas on right-sizing government, utilizing specific expertise. That's helped me, but it's worked with me because we've created that environment to benefit from that expertise. If there isn't the authorizing environment as a whole within the political system, then no matter of international support will ever make an impact because it'll just get blocked. Right? If this reform turns out to be Qubad's reform, well, the people that don't like Qubad, and there might be a few, right, will stop it from happening because everything is personalized in this country. The problems are personal.
Right.
They're not, ideological. They're not institutional. They're personal.
Okay, like if going back to the problem, or let's say the negotiation between Iraq and, say Baghdad, but to say Baghdad and KRI. Can you update us? I mean, where is it now? And Ms. Jeanine, the next question comes to you. I'm sure you've tried, but is it a possibility for you to be a third part and make this, or let's say make that those two sides to come near to each other and come up with the solution for that never-ended problem?
Well, I spent a year coming back and forth between Erbil and Baghdad on the budget law.
Until you start learning Arabic, by the way.
Yeah, I spent so much time that I'm starting to learn Arabic, and I realized, and actually this is, joking aside, there is a need for Kurds to know Arabic, especially if you're going to get into politics, because for me it was a major hindrance, like to negotiate against the federal government without having the mastery of the language was a huge problem. I was lucky to have people like Dr. Amanj, Khalid Shwani, Omid Sabah, great Arabic speakers with me that were very helpful. But in that negotiation, it was about the budget law. It was very tense, it was very complicated, but we were able to ultimately reach an agreement because we persisted. Both sides persisted, both sides needed it, and we came up with a solution that was implementable. I didn't get 100% of what I wanted. Mm-hmm. Baghdad didn't get 100% of what they wanted. Nobody felt like they won completely. Nobody felt like they lost completely. And that's always, I think, the best outcome of a negotiation. Now, we have a new government formed. We want to support this new government in Baghdad. We have good people in this government in Baghdad. We like the Prime Minister. We like the previous Prime Minister. We may have liked most of the Prime Ministers in the past.
Right.
But again, we have to not personalize these issues. Right? We have a budget law coming up again. We need to restart those discussions. We have oil and gas issues. We need a law to regulate the oil and gas industry in Iraq. We have revenue sharing issues. We have security issues. If we approach them methodically and logically, not emotionally, and if we're unified as Kurdistan, we can get an outcome.
So you still believe it's too difficult for Dr. Latif to try to solve it, maybe?
No, I think Dr. Latif will do his best to solve it within the authorities that the president of the country has. But I can't just rely on Dr. Latif. He's not there to represent Kurdish interests in Baghdad. He's the president of the Republic of Iraq. I can't rely on Khalid Shwani, who's the new Minister of Justice, to represent Kurdish interests. I need the Prime Minister to understand, and I'm sure he does, Prime Minister Sudani, to say, I'm the Prime Minister of Iraq. I can't have 4 provinces of my country in turmoil or upset or neglected. Right? Just how he must care about Basra, he has to care about Sulaimania. And that comes from a vision, and it actually comes from him feeling that the Kurdistan regional government is not working to undermine him. Right? And where the UN can certainly, and Jeanine personally can come in, is, yeah, absolutely, she can mediate, she can moderate, she can engage, she can glare at us, she can get angry at us, she can, there's a lot that the international community can do to facilitate, not to impose, but to facilitate a dialogue, to help sometimes unlock a sensitivity, to address an insecurity that we have, because ultimately what's ruling this country is fear and insecurity.
Right. So, Ms. Jeanine, what do you think about this, like we call it a never-end issue between KRI and Baghdad?
Well, I think I just mentioned already the need for stability between, in the relationship between Baghdad and Erbil, and the many good principles that both capitals agreed upon so many times. Actually, from my first day in office as the SRSG, I called for the implementation of a predictable and institutionalized mechanism to have a dialogue between the two capitals on all outstanding issues. I mean, hydrocarbon law, but also the budget, disputed territories. The list is quite long, right? So again, we go back to the Constitution in 2005. It was drafted in a way hastily, but with great intentions to, go ahead with supporting legislation at a later stage. But after 17 years, we need to conclude that there was zero progress in further enhancing the federal system in Iraq. There was zero progress on a number of supporting laws. So here I go again back to both capitals in a way, is that, don't just speak and use beautiful words, but also implement. And there were so many opportunities in past years to get things going with this institutionalized mechanism or dialogue, a structural and regular dialogue, and start addressing one by one all the issues. I think that at the end of the day, I need to conclude there is great a lack of mutual trust, and that you will need to address. And indeed, personal vendettas do play a role. But now to think that Dr. Latif will go and change the world, it's not going to happen, because it should be between the two governments. Right. It should be the government of the Kurdistan region and the federal government in
Right,
Baghdad.
So in a word, there were no need for that much debate on who's the person, let's say. In a way or another, I understand both answers.
Actually, I'm sorry to insist, but it's actually important, because this is what goes wrong in Iraq. If we go to a position, because now Latif Rashid is the president of Iraq, and we kind of look on him to make the world a better place, it's not going to happen. You need institutionalized mechanisms that are separate from persons. So not Qubad Talabani, not Masroor Barzani, not Najaf Barzani, nor Latif Rashid. It should be an institutionalized
But the policy
mechanism.
and the system and the implementation. As we mentioned from the beginning, the initiatives there, work's being done on the policies. The initiative is there, and the plan is there, ongoing work. Let's open the floor for the questions. I have many, Ms. Jeanine. We don't have you here a lot, so I believe you will be receiving a lot. This section, they complain a bit because they were not seen last time. So please, the lady first here.
زۆر سپاس بۆ هەم لایەک پرسیارەکەم بۆ کاک قوبادیە پرسیارەکەت لە یەکەم جوابم بدەوە بە سەریعی تاکو من شەرحەکەت بۆ بکەم کە تۆ لە هەولێر دەچێ سلێمانی یان لە سلێمانی دێوە هەولێرێ ببوورە من ناوم سلڤانە دڵشادە سۆسیەڵ ئەکتیڤیستم بە ڕێگا دەچی بە کام ڕێگادا دەڕۆی بە کەرکووک یان کۆیە
کۆیە
ئایا تۆ تاکو ئێستا دەزانی کە گوندی من هەرمۆتە لەبارەی ڕوومالەکەی ئیران تاکو ئێستا لە ماڵی خۆیان نینە سەلامی کرد لە کۆیە کردووە تاکو ئێستا ئایا ببینە چ خزمەت گوزاریەک دانراوە بۆ کۆیە بۆ هەتاکو ئێستا هیچ پلانێکی حکوومەت بۆ کۆیە دانراوە چۆن تۆ جەنابەت لە مابینی یەکێتی و پارتی دانراوی بۆ حالکردنی هەموو کێشەکان کۆیەش ئەوها دانراوە چونکە لە مابینی هەردوو لایەنەکان کۆیە هیچ خزمەتگوزاریەکی بۆ نەکراوە من وەکو مەسیحیەکی خەرج کوێ بازەکەم زۆر
سپاس بۆ پرسیارەکەت تکایە محاولە بکەین پرسیارەکان ڕەبتی هەبێ بە مەوزوعەکەەوە بەخاص فەرموو بێزەحمەت مایکەکە لەکوێیە
والله من بۆ خاتون من باش بە حاڵی خۆم پێم وایە کە عێراق قۆناغی ئیسلاحی تێپەڕانەوە واتە قابلی ئیسلاح نییە لەبەر دوو هۆکاری زۆر گرنگ لەبەر سێ هۆکار یەکەم گەندەڵی وەکو خۆڵێ بە سیستماتیک کراوە دووەم ئیسلاح بەوانە ناکرێت کە دۆخەکان گەیاندووە سێم استراتیژی نخبەی دەسەڵاتداریش بە گەندەڵکردنی هەمووانە بۆی کەس شەرعێتی باسی ئیسلاحی نەمێنێ و پێم وایە کە ئیسلاحی تێپەڕانوە قابلی گۆڕانیش نێ لە ڕێی شۆڕشەوە پاڵێورا و مرەشەحەوەیە دۆخەکە بەم جۆرە تا ئایندەیەکی نادیات بەردەوام بێ ئەو ئەڵێ چی زۆر سپاس
بەڵێ فەرموو
We are past the stage.
Thank you very much.
You don't get the translation.
No, don't repeat it. It's just, did I understand correctly that you said that Iraq is beyond the possibility of...
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So it's kind of what Ali Alawi would describe as the zombie state? No? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for this honest debate. I'm Nazan Bajikhani, a gender expert teaching at Sciences Po in Paris and also advising KRI president on gender and higher education here in Kurdistan. We talk about challenges. I believe that one of the major challenges facing impactful politics and policy-based governance is patriarchy. None of you mentioned that. I would love to hear your latest insights on that. Thank you.
بەڵێ مایکەکە بەرینە باڵێکێکمان فەرموو
ئەم کاتتان باش زۆر سپاس خاتو جەنین تەلار خان و کاقوبات ڕوونکردنەوەیەکی زۆر گرنگ بوو پرسیارەکەم بۆ کاقوبادە کاقوبات یعنی زۆر کەس شایدیەوە لە سەردەمی کابینەی پێشوو کە جەناب تو لەگەڵ جەنابی سەرۆکی حکوومەت کاگنێچیڤان بارزانی ئاڵنگاری زۆر زۆر گرنگتان هاتە بەردەم و جەنابت باست کرد ئێستا لەم پێشەکی و هینەی ئەم وتانی کە پێشکەشت کرد پرسیارەکەم وەی ئایا ئەم ڕوحیەتەی کە جەنابت باست کرد لە ڕوبەڕووبوونەوەی ئەم مەترسیانە و ڕوحی ئیشکردن و ڕوحی هاوبەشی لەگەڵ یەکتری ئەمە نەقڵ نەبوو بۆم کابینەیە و حەزەکەم بە سەراحەت وەڵامی ئەم پرسیارم بیتێت جەنابی جەنین خان ئێمە لە هەرێمی من ڕەحمان غەریبم لە سەنتەری میترۆ ڕەنگە بمناسی لە هەرێمی کوردستان و لە عێراقا ئێمە ڕوبەڕووی هین بووینێتەوە مەوزوعی دەربازبوون لە سزا لە تاوانەکان بەرامبەر بە ڕۆژنامە نووسان سبەینێ ڕۆژی جیهانی دەربازبوونە لە سزا یا کۆتایی هێنان بە دەربازبوون لە سزا لە تاوانەکانی بەرامبەر بە ڕۆژنامە نووسان کە UN دەستنیشانی کردووە ئەمێ پەیامی جەناب بزانم بۆ حکومڕانی لە هەرێمی کوردستان و لە عێراق سەبارەت بە مەوزوعی دەربازبوون لە سزا لەو تاوانانی بەرامبەر بە ڕۆژنامە نووسان کراوە سوپاس بە بەڕێستان
پرسیارێکی ئەخیر وەرەگرین فەرموو
شكرا جزيلا سؤال للسيد قوباد هناك اعتداءات تركية مستمرة وهناك اعتداءات إيرانية مستمرة لا نرى لكم أو نحن نعتقد أو نسأل حضرتك باعتبارك مسؤول رفيع ما لديكم من استراتيجية لمواجهة هذه الاعتداءات أو فقط هناك اعتماد فقط على الحكومة الاتحادية في هذا الموضوع. السؤال الثاني للسيدة جنين بلاسخارت أنا من أحد شباب الحراك الشعبي كثير من أبناء المجتمع العراقي وبالأخص أبناء الحراك الشعبي ينظرون إلى حضرتك أنك لديك وجوه متعددة في التعامل مع الشأن العراقي مع الشباب والمجتمع ومع الحكومة، ونريد أن نعرف الموقف الحقيقي من لحضرتكم من المجازر التي حدثت، من الاعتقالات، من المغيبين. شكرا جزيلا.
دەست زۆر بەس کراوەتەوانێ بەڵام بۆ ڕاوندێکی تر بۆ ئەوی بتوانن جوابی پرسیارەکانتان بنەوانێ. Would you start or?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Oh, you want to start?
No, please.
Okay. So to talk about different phases, I'm not sure what you mean with that, but I think I can safely say that you feel that I engage with people that you would suggest not to be a partner for me in dialogue. Could he confirm before I start to talk about something that he did not ask?
تقدر يعني تحاول تجاوبك أو تحاول توصل لك إذا السؤال واصل لها صحيح فممكن؟
Yeah, نعم.
ما يعني ما مخلصة جوابها بس تحاول تسألك هل هذا وصلك؟
يعني مطلوب مني أعيد السؤال عفوا؟
إذا ما وصلك السؤال.
السيدة جنين بلاسخارت، هناك حديث لعله حضرتك قد سمعتيه كثيرا. المجتمع العراقي وبشكل خاص أبناء الحراك الشعبي الذين تظاهروا في تشرين وتعرضوا لمجازر واعتقالات وتغييب، يعتقدون أو لديهم صورة نمطية عن دور البعثة الدولية في العراق بشكل عام ودور حضرتك بشكل خاص. يعتقدون أن لحضرتك عدة وجوه بالتعامل مع الشأن العراقي، يعني تعامل مع السلطة شيء وتعامل مع أبناء الشعب شيء.
شكرا.
ممكن توضحين؟
شكرا.
Let me be very clear here because it's indeed not the first time that somebody is asking me this.
This is about the expectations that we already mentioned. So
let me be clear. I have only one face, this face. But I will speak with anyone, interest group, armed actor, individuals, activists, human rights defenders, everyday Iraqis. I will speak to all because all of them are part of the society. So the UN is not about being a bestie with a certain group or with a certain individual. The UN will have to speak with everybody, even if I fundamentally disagree with a person's views or perceptions. I will speak with that person or with that group because dialogue is the only way forward for Iraq. So you can protest, and I support any form of peaceful protest. But at the end of the day, you will need to have a dialogue to come to conclusions and to come to compromises. So again, with all due respect, I have only one face.
We apologize for that. And please, we have more 3 questions. The gentleman here, the lady there, and...
Yeah, well, this one is actually relevant because many people... I remember one more thing about the face. I remember really well that I met with Abu Fadak, who is the head of the Hennis-Plasschaert. I was almost,
actually, that was the reason.
No, I'm saying this. I was almost... But he is representing a state institution. So again, even Hennis-Plasschaert having a difficult relationship with certain groups in society, they will need to talk to better understand each other. So again, I'm giving you this example because it was the example most used in many of the campaigns against me. But without dialogue, the future of this country is going to be pretty black. So that's why I continue to emphasize, don't make the mistake of me engaging with anyone as if that would be against you. It's in the interest of the country and all Iraqis. Then going to the
lady,
the Patriarch Society.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, it's true. I mean, good governance is inclusive, and I think it's fair to say that we still have a long way ahead of us in Iraq, including in the Kurdistan region. And I can do a separate speech on this issue, I will not. But it's true, it's part of society and we will need to tackle it. It will not be done overnight. It has to do with religion, with culture, with history. And so patience is going to be key for any woman in Iraq. But I am sure if I look at what is happening now here in the Kurdistan region, but also throughout Iraq, is I meet so many powerful, talented women that if they would unite each other, that they would unite, and thereby kind of use the megaphone for their voices, that at a certain point, no man in Iraq can say we did not hear you. So this is, I mean, yes, I agree with you, but I mean, work is ongoing.
And then the last question was the journalist and the right of the...
Yes, of course. I'm sorry. I wrote it down and then I forget all of it. It has everything to do with my faces. It's a bit...
Yeah, because I'm holding my mic. I cannot write. I cannot...
But what I wanted to say on the freedom of speech, yeah. You know, freedom of speech and assembly, but freedom of speech, the work of journalists to be able to work freely throughout Iraq, including the Kurdistan region, is vital, essential to any democracy. Is that a done deal in Iraq, including in the Kurdistan region? No. That's why we publish our reports regularly on the freedom of expression and what is going wrong. And sometimes things are also progressing in the right direction. But no, also here, if we talk about the meaningful participation of women or free speech and the ability of journalists to do their work freely, there is work to do. I mean, Iraq is not a perfect state. There is no perfect state, but I mean, here we have more work to do. Let me summarize it like this before I get to...
Thank you very much. Qubad, is your turn. You have a few questions raised to you.
Thank you. I'll mix some of them. I'll answer in Kurdish.
Please.
And some I'll answer in English. Wow, where do I start? 3 very different questions. لسر ئەوەی بەڕێزەی کە پرسیاری کرد لێم دەربارەی تەدەخلات و هێرشەکانی وڵاتانی دراوسێ یەک شت ئەڵێم لەوە ئەچێ هەر کورد و کوردستان خەمی سیادە و یەکپارچەی عێراق بێ چەندین وڵات تەجاوزەکەن لەسەر سیادەی عێراق چ لە ڕووی سەربازیەوە چ لە ڕووی سیاسیەوە لە هەموو ڕوویەکەوە تەجاوزەکەن لەسەر سیادەی عێراق و کەسی شیچ ناڵێ بەڵام کورد کە بیر لەوە بکاتەوە تەجاوز بکە لەسەر سیادە و یەکپارچەی عێراق هەموو دنیا یێتە سەرخەت و ئێمە بە خائن وەسفەکرێن و ئێمە بە ئینفیساڵی وەسفەکرێن و من ئەم لەمە تێناگەم بۆیە سیادەی عێراق سیادەی عێراقە ئەگەر کەس بۆی نییە بیبەزێنێ با کەس بۆی نەبەزێنێ ئەگەر هەموو کەسێک بۆی هەیە بیبەزێنێت دەفەرموو با ئێمەش بیبەزێنین بۆیە ئەوە وەڵامێک بۆ پرسیارەکەی بەڕێزم سەبارەت بە کۆی و خۆی ئێمە زۆر بەمان لێرە لەگەڵ پرۆفیسۆریش کۆی و خۆین بۆیە بەتاکید خەمێکی کۆیە ئەخۆین کۆیە چەند کێشەیەک هەیە کە ڕەنگ بێ خاص بن بە کۆیە ئێمە ناوچەی 140مان هەیە لە بینی حکوومەتی هەرێم و حکوومەتی فێدرالی بەڵام ناوچەیەکی 140 ترمان هەیە لە بینی زۆنی زەرد و زۆنی سەوز کۆیەش ناوچەی 140 لە ناو هەرێمی کوردستان چکەن ئیداریەن سەر بە مەحافەزەی هەولێرە بەڵام کەلتوریەن و سیاسیەن و جەماوەریەن سەر بە ئەولایە وە بەداخەوە ئێستش جۆرێک لە سیستمێکی دوو ئیدارەی پەیڕە و ئەکرێ لە هەرێمی کوردستان مەشارێع لە داهاتی مەحافەزاتەکانەوە بەکارەهێنرێ کۆیە خنکاوە نە سنوورێکی هەیە نە مەشروعێکی گەورەی لێ ئەکرێ نە تیجارەتێکی لێ ئەکرێ داهاتی کۆیە لەکوێ بێ وەک پێویست حکوومەتەکەی من نەتوانێ دەعمی کۆیە بکە سەرۆکی حکوومەت نەتوانێت بەک پێویست تعویزی کۆیە بداتەوە لەبەرەوەی کە ئەو تیجارەتەی نییە لەبەرەوەی کە ئەو کەوتووەتە لە بین زۆنەکانی سەوز و بەناو سەوز و زەردەوە ئەوە خەلەلێکە بۆیە ئێمە زۆر دەمێکە هانی ئەوەمان داوە سیاسەتی مالی خۆمان بگۆڕین سیاسەتی مەشروعی خۆمان بگۆڕین بۆ ئەوەی داهاتە مهم نییە لەکوێوە دێت داهات لە دۆکەوە بێ لە سلەیمانیەوە بێ لە هەولێرەوە بێ داهاتە کۆ ئەکرێتەوە هاوڕایی نییە لەسەر ئەم سیاسەتە بۆچوونی جیاواز هەیە لەسەر ئەم سیاسەتە ڕەنگ بێ هەندێک کەس حەز بکەن لەبەرەوەی کە محافظەیەک داهاتەکەی زۆر بێ و محافظەیەکی تر داهاتەکەی کەم بێ حەز نەکەن بە عەدالەتەوە ئەو داهاتانە تەوزیع بکرێن ڕەنگ بێ خەڵکە بن لەناو حکوومەتەکەی من کە وا بیر بکەنەوە من پێم وایە بڕیارێکمان داوە موچە ئەولەویەتە کە موچە ئەولەویەتە ئەبێ داهاتی کوردستان کۆ بکرێتەوە و بدرێ بە موچە دوای کە موچەماندا ئەو داهاتەی کە ئەمێنێتەوە ئەبێ دادپەروەرانە سەرف بکرێ لەسەر هەموو محافەزاتەکانی هەرێمی کوردستان بە کۆی خۆشەویستمانەوە بەڵام ئەوە بڵین مناقەشەیەکە کە هێشتا بەردەوامین لە ناوی و ئیشەڵا پێش کۆتایی تەمەنی ئەم کابینەیە ڕەنگ بێ بگەینە دەرەنجامێک لەسەری نەزانخان زۆر بە پرسیارەکەی زۆر بەجێ بوو سوپاس یەکەم و ڕاستە ئێمە هیچ کاممان ئاماژەمان بەوە نەدا کە مەوزوعی سیاسەتی جەندەری بێت یان ئەو سیستمی پەیتریارکی بێت کە خۆی ئاماژەی پێدا ڕاستە زاڵە سیاست هێشتا لە کوردستان یاری پیاوانە و سیاستکردن و حکوومەت و حیزبەکانیش تا ڕادەیەک نادی پیاوانن و تاکو ئەم عەقڵیەتە نەگۆڕێت لە هەرێمی کوردستان ئێمە قەت ناتوانین پێشکەوین وەکو هەرێمێک من خۆشحاڵم حیزبەکەی من چەند ژنێکی سەرکردەی بە توانای تایە و هەندێکیان لێرە حوزوریان هەیە توانیویانە نەک دیفاع تەنها لە دیفاع لە ژن بکەن سیاست دابڕێژن چۆن من دایما ئەڵێم سەرۆک کۆمار لەوێ نییە دیفاع لە کوردستان کە ئەو ژنانەیش کە ئەبن بە سەرکردە تەنها ئیشان ئەوە نەبێت حەسر نەکرێنەوە دەسەڵاتیان بچووک نەکرێتەوە لە پێناوی پاراستنی مافی ژن ئەوانە بێ قائد بن وڵات بەڕێوە ببن وەزیرن سەرکردن ئیشەڵا ڕئیس وزەراشە بن ڕۆژێک سەرۆک کۆمارە بن ڕۆژێک بۆیە ئەمە خەلەلێکە کە تاکو پیا و حکوم کە لەم وڵاتە بەتەنیا بەو عەقڵیەتەی کە هەندێک جار ئەی بینین پێشکەوتنمان هەمیشە ئەستەم ئەبێت
زۆر سپاس کاک قوباد و دائیمە جێگات دیارە لە مافی ژنانە بەشدار بوویت و ستیتمەنتی خۆتت داوە پرسیاری ترماوە وەڵامی بێت باڵێ
کاکە ڕەحمان پرسیارێکی کرد کە پەیوەندی بە ڕۆحیەت هەبوو من عادەتەن زۆر سەریحم و هەمیشە قسە ئەەکەم بەعزاریش تیا ئەکەوم لەو سەراحەتە بەڵام نامەوێ ئەم جارە تیا بکەوم لەم سەراحەتە من کە بەشێکم لە نظامێک من ناتوانم بێم قسە بەو نظامە بڵێم ڕۆژێک کە توانم ڕێی خۆم بەم لەسەر پرسیارەکەی کاک ڕەحمان کە بەشێک نەبم لەم حکوومەتە ئەو کاتە بە سەراحەت ئینجا لە مزەکەرەکەمەوە ئەبێت لە لێدوانێکەوە ئەبێت لە نووسینێکە ئەبێت ڕێی خۆمەڵێم بەس تاکو من بەشێک بم لەم حکوومەتە احترامی حکوومەتەکە ئەگرم هەوڵێم بە پێی توانای خۆم چاکی بکەم ئەگەر پێم چاکرا خێر ئەگەر پێم چاک نەکرا داوای لێبوردنەکەم
زۆر سپاس وەقتمان کەم ماوە we have just 10 minutes left so I have last question Ms. Jeanine next election do you do you enhance the Iraqis or do you motivate the Iraqis to go and vote to participate in the
this is the only question?
Okay. That would be my last question and then if we still have time we will have time we will open the why I'm asking that let me explain thanks for the last results with the last election was notably fair and accurate and many efforts being spent there to make it happen in a proper way but the outcome it's always negotiated in a different table, in a political table. It's not what the voters vote for is not the result that
No, I get
comes
your
out.
question. So voter confidence, you're referring to a lack of voter confidence.
Exactly, for
And
you, from your
that
position.
unfortunately is a fact. We have seen it with the voter turnout last year with the federal elections. Also, I mean, within this context, again, I refer to the lack of good governance, you know, the lack of accountability, the pervasive systemic corruption. So what we see is that many people in Iraq lost faith in the ruling class as, you know, able to solve their problems. And so I think the new government has a priority to kickstart public service delivery, to build the trust of the public in the ability of the political class to actually do something. But again, and I go back to corruption, and maybe you think it's a bit boring, but it's important, because so many state resources are being diverted for private and partisan interests. And this is exactly what the people feel. Public service, I mean, the water, the roads, the energy, name it. Why did people go to the streets in 2019? Because of a lack of prospects, not only political, but also economic and social. And, you know, any prime minister, whether it's the current one, Mohammed Shia Soudani, who has said all the right things and has a great program, but he will only be able to do what political leaders of parties, be it Shia, Sunni, Kurds, doesn't matter, allow him to do. So also here it's important to manage public expectations. It's not just the government, it's the whole political class. And the urgent need to solve a few fundamental challenges. And the first one right now is corruption, because it's by now the major cause of dysfunctionality in Iraq.
Ms. Jeanine, you're here since 2018. Can I say you feel safe in Iraq?
Look, I am in a great position that many people look after my safety and security, and I fell in love with this country a long time ago, actually when I was a defense minister, and we deployed our troops here in the fight against Daesh. We were flying the F-16s. I visited both Erbil and Baghdad at the time. I'm living here now for 4 years. It's an amazing country with so much potential. And a lot of talented youth. And this is actually the reason why I keep on going.
Right.
Because, I mean, I cannot imagine that we just say goodbye to all those young Iraqis.
And normally, how long this mission lasts for?
I don't know.
Okay, so what do you, I'm curious about that shift from being a Minister of Defense and shifting to the Iraqi mission. As I mentioned from the beginning, obviously you enjoy the challenge. I mean, would you tell us how it happened? You've been recruited, you've been headhunted. It was a promotion. How it was?
I was a minister. At a certain point, there was an end to my term in office. I was thinking of what I could do next. And then I was always interested in the United Nations, NATO, you know, the European Union. My career a long time ago started, I started as a civil servant for the European Union. So I love to operate in this, you know, international context. And I learned about the position in Iraq. So I actually had a meeting with the Secretary General in New York, and so this is how it all happened.
You know, I believe this is an inspiring story for many women. Qubad, do you recommend the next يعني انتخاباتي كي تعزب كاين بكردي؟ بكين انتخاباتي تازه بكين بخلق ليبرو دنبان دندانيان دوري هي بكردي قصب كين ها يعني كم نكره بالانجليزي بيك ما بكردي بيم سؤاله
انتخابات بكين لك بوكوي هي كردستاني بقى
كردستان طبعا جناب بكردستان
بكين بلام انتخابات بكين ك خروقاتي تيانبت شون يكيك لو زختانەی کە خاتو جنین و کۆمەڵگەی نێودەوڵەتی زۆر زەختیان کرد لەسەر عێراق ئەو بوو کە ئەبێ ئینتیخاباتێکی پاک و بێگەرد بێت.
ڕاست.
ئۆکەی؟ ئەو ئینتیخابات ئەگەر ئەمڕۆ لە کوردستان بکرێ بەو قانونی کە ئێستا لە کوردستانە هەیە ئێمە بە باشی نازانین چکە نەپاکە بێ نەبێگەردە بێ بۆیە ئەمە پێویستمان بە قانونێکە بێ کە قانونێک بێ کە قابلی جێبەجێکردن بێ قانونێک نەبێت کە قاتێک بێ بۆ حیزبێک دوورابێت قانونێک بێت کە هەموو کەسێ هەست بکە ئەو قانونە عەدالەت ئەپارێزێ و مافی هەموو دەنگدەرەکان ئەپارێزێت و پێم وایە ئەو تەجروبەی کە بینیمان لە عێراق بە سیستمی بازنەکان ناتوان بڵێن بێگەردە چکە لە هیچ وڵاتێک بێگەردی نییە 100% نییە لە ئینتیخاباتە و لە ئەمریکا ئێستا شەڵێن ئەموتی دۆڕاندەم ئەموتی نەیدۆڕاند بەڵام ئەبێ ئێمە دەرگای خروقات کەم بکەینەوە دەرگای ناعەدالەتی کەم بکەینەوە و وا بکەین ئەو کەسێک کە دەنگیدا ئەو حەقەی نەفەوتێ
کێن خەیاتی ئەم قانونە تازەیە کە بە کەڵکی ئەوە بێت کێن بڵێن کەین تێڵەرەکان بە زمانی ئینگلیزی ینی ئەبێ کێ ئەم قانونە چاکات ئەبێ کێ ئەم
قانونە پەرلەمانی کوردستانە بێ ئەو قانونە چاکات
تەمام
ئەبێ پەرلەمانی کوردستانە ئەو قانونە چاکات و هەموو حیزبەکان بەشدارن لەو پەرلەمانە و پێم وایە بە هاوکاری پسپۆرەکانی UN یان وڵاتانی تریش ئەتوانین سوود لە ئەزمونە باشەکان وەرگین قانونێک دابڕێژین دەنگی لەسەر بدەین کە باش بێت.
تمام. Ms. Jeanine, what do you think?
No, let me not to say too much about this, but one comment I would like to convey is that I spend lots of my time and energy in trying to bring together the Kurdish region political parties in discussing compromises on a number of outstanding issues with regards to the parliamentary elections here in the Kurdistan region. Now, the 1st of October was the initially planned date for elections. That is over a month ago. And right now, I do not have a new date to work on. That is bad news. It's bad news because you're neglecting democratic basics and you need to manage public expectation, and timely elections are essential. So all parties, in particular the yellow and the green parties, should come together, compromise quickly in the interest of the people in the Kurdistan region.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Qubad. Thank you, Ms. Jeanine. Thank you, everyone, for giving us the time. Thank you.